Welcome to Finding Holiness, where we delve into timeless Torah wisdom, revealing the sacred in everyday moments. Join us on a journey to elevate your spirituality and discover holiness in every aspect of life. I'm your host, Rabbi David Kadosh, and together, let's embark on a path of spiritual exploration. I hope you enjoy this next episode. Okay, Erev Tov, continuing Masechet Yevamot in our Mishnah. We are on the third chapter, Per Gimel, Mishnah Het, 8 Mishnah. With regards to the 15 Ervas mentioned in the opening Mishnah of the Masechet, the Mishnah tells us that V'kulan shayu bahen kiddushin o gerushin besafek. If any of those situations, the brother who died made a questionable kiddushin with that erva, or had a questionable divorce, we'll see what that means. If that husband was to die without any children, then the co-wives of the erva, who are normally exempt, they have to perform chalitza with the living brother, but they cannot be taken into yibum. So Mishnah goes on to describe what is the case of questionable kiddushin, questionable marriage, or questionable divorce. What is the case of questionable kiddushin? Zarak la kiddushin. For example, they were standing, a man and woman were standing exactly 8 amot away, and he threw an object of value towards her to make the kiddushin. Kiddushin can be acquired through kesef, biyah, shtar. In this case, it's kesef. So he wanted to throw an object that if she acquires, they're married. The problem is safek karov lo, safek karov la. Where it landed, we're not sure if it was closer to him. If it was closer to him, then nothing really happened because she couldn't acquire it, or if it was closer to her. So this would be a case, this is a case of questionable kiddushin. What would be the case of safek gerushin, questionable divorce? So you can either have 3 possibilities. Number 1, katav biktav yado ve'en alav edim. For example, the husband wrote the get in his own handwriting, but there's no witnesses that are that signed on it. So that's one safek gerushin. We'll talk more about that when we get to Masechet Gittin. Number 2, yesh alav edim ve'en bozman. You have witnesses that did sign on it, but it has no date on the get, so that's also a safek gerushin. And then you have yesh bozman ve'en bo ela eid echad, or it has a date, but you only have one witness on the get. So in all these 3 cases, zeu safek gerushin, these are the cases of questionable divorce. There are 2 last mishnayot in this chapter, which are of the confusing type, and then it gets drastically simpler to understand. So we'll get through them. Shlosha achin, Mishnah Tet in Per Gimel. Shlosha achin nesuin shalosh nochriot. You have 3 brothers who are married to 3 unrelated women. Umet achad mehen. One of the brothers died. Ve'asa ba hashani ma'amar. And the second brother made a ma'amar marriage. Again, that's like a quasi marriage with the widow, a partial marriage with his widow. Vamet, and then the second brother died. So now you have 2 widows. One to whom he had been fully married, and the second partially married. What is the law? Both these widows now perform chalitza, meaning they cannot perform yibum with the remaining brother that's alive. The pasuk says, one of them dies, her yavam shall come to her. The yibum is only performed with a widow who has a yibum bond from one yavam. Not with a widow who has a bond with 2 individuals. And since this widow had a bond with the mamar wife was never fully married to the second brother, but she still has that yibum bond. So therefore,
you lost me there. Can you do it one more time? A little bit slower, so I really understand.
Okay, you got 3 brothers married to 3 sisters. Okay, one of the brothers died, so A dies. Okay, then this B marries the widow, also second wife, half married with a ma'amar, and then B dies. Okay, so now you're only left with C. C has to. The Mishnah basically says that C has to perform chalitza to the remaining widows. He cannot perform yibum with them. Okay, because you can only perform yibum if you had a yibum bond with one person, but he actually has a yibum bond with 2, so therefore he has to perform yibum chalitza instead of yibum. All right, in a nutshell, that's the Mishnah that we just said. Rabbi Shimon says, he argues with the Tanakama. He says, meyabem le'ezo sheyirtzeh vecholes la'sheniya. That no, he can choose which one of the remaining 2 widows he wants to have yibum with, and the other one he does chalitza. He doesn't need to do chalitza on both. Shnei achim nesuin lishtei achayot. If you have 2 brothers married to 2 sisters, Umet achad mehem, one of the brothers died. Ve'achar kach meta ishto shel sheni, and then the wife of the second brother died. So now you have brother B with wife A are alive. Harezu asura alav olamit. The widow, so wife A, is forbidden to brother B forever, because at one point they were not allowed to get married. So therefore they cannot be with each other. Hoil v'ne'esra alav sha'achat, because she became forbidden to him at one time. The last Mishnah in Perek Gimel says, Shnaim shekichu shete nashim. If you have two men who got married to two women, not related to each other, ubishat kenisatan lachupa hechlifu et shel zeh lazeh ve'et shel zeh lazeh. When they entered the chuppah to complete the marriage, they accidentally switched one's wife for the other one's wife. Again, this Rachel and Leah, yeah, so they were totally covered. And not only that, they brought them home and they lived with the other one's wife. Okay? So if you're wondering how this happened, because in the olden days they did kiddushin well before the actual chuppah. So they were technically married even however long before that. Now they got to the chuppah to consummate the marriage, and they brought her home. Then he didn't know it was dark outside. Yalla, he took another woman. But he's really married to the other one, not to this person. So hare elu chayavim mishum eshet ish. These people are each liable to a korban chatat for having lived with another married woman. Hayu achin, and if the men were brothers, mishum eshet ach, they're now liable to an additional chatat of living with your brother's wife. Ve'im hayu achayot, and if the two women were sisters, then you have another chatat, mishum isha el achota. You have a third chatat of living with a wife and her sister. Ve'im hayu nidot, and if those women happen to be menstruating, then mishum nida, there's a fourth chatat involved because they cohabited with a nidat. Further laws with regards to this case. Umafrishin otan shlosha chodashim. Now the women have to go back to their original husband. It's not like they can stay with the new guy. That's not what was intended for, right? So they have to go back. The Mishnah says, Umafrishin otan shlosha chodashim. Before we put him back to the original husband, we have to separate them for 3 months. Shema me'ubaroten. Because maybe they became pregnant with the wrong husband or the wrong man that they cohabited by mistake. And if they are, by the way, that child becomes a mamzer and cannot marry regular Jews of proper lineage. Now, after 3 months have passed, you can tell whether the woman is pregnant or not, and then you go back. If the women were young girls, and therefore they're not able to get pregnant, machzirin otan miyad, we can return them right away to their real husbands. Ve'im hayu kohanot, and if the women were daughters of kohanim, nifselu min terumah, they become disqualified from eating terumah, even if their husbands die without their having a child, because they unfortunately they cohabited with someone who was an erva to them. It was an accident, but that actually causes disqualification from eating terumah. Okay, that concludes Perek Gimel. Hacholetz levimto, Mishnah Aleph and Perek Dalet. Hacholetz levimto, if someone performed chalitza with the Yevamah, so he chose not to get, not to do yibum with the woman. Venimset me'oberet, and later it was found that this woman was pregnant with the deceased husband's child. Ve'yalda, and she gave birth. So now, bisman she'avalad shel kayama, if the child is viable, means the child is going to live, then the chalitza that the guy performed is totally meaningless. You only perform yibum or chalitza if there's no child. So the chalitza becomes meaningless. She didn't need to do it. Therefore, hu mutar bikrovotea, the yavam is allowed to marry her close relatives. Vehi mutar bikrovav, and she's allowed to marry his relatives. Velo pesala mina keuna, and he did not disqualify her from marrying into the keuna, from marrying a kohen. However, en avalad shel kayama, if the child is not viable, meaning the child will not live, it's sick, she miscarried, or for whatever reason, then the chalitza was necessary. Now once the chalitza is valid, because the child was not viable. So, hu asur bikrovotea, he would be forbidden to marry her close relatives. Vehi asura bikrovav, she is forbidden to marry his close relatives. Upsala min hakehuna, and he has disqualified her from marrying into the kehuna. B'ezrat Hashem, we'll continue with more Mishnayot as the week goes on.